If you're someone who loves both video games and movies, which is most people in this day and age, let's be honest, then you probably identify with that craving that you get from time to time. You know, the one that makes you want to capture the energy of a specific book or film, but in video game form, or, vice versa. And I don't mean like proper licensed video games that are based on films or TV shows, and don't get me wrong, there have certainly been some bangers, but licensed games based on other IPs like that, they've got a murky relationship to quality at best. If I wanted to capture the raw, bare-knuckle fury of the raid, or live out the iconic hallway fight scene from Oldboy, I would play Sifu. If I wanted to experience the neon-drenched, eclectic hyperviolence of Drive, I would play Hotline Miami. And if I wanted to bask in the lightly fantastical slice-of-life fixings of a Hayao Miyazaki film, I would play... what, exactly? I feel like one of the most universal video game cravings is a game which captures the energy of a Ghibli film, but in the video game format. I'm not the only person who thinks that, right? Like, there's something so pensive and atmospheric in the worlds of Hayao Miyazaki's imagination, the rich and vibrant landscapes, the settings which feel both naturalistic and fantastical at the same time. There's undoubtedly a vibe to Miyazaki's films which compel a person to want to explore them, and a video game is the most natural medium to transcend that barrier. There have been titles which came close. I mean, the Ni no Kuni games, which actually commissioned Studio Ghibli to provide animation and art direction, have the look down to a T, obviously, but they don't quite capture the tone. Breath of the Wild has a real Ghibli-esque sheen to it too. Hell, the whole reason I played that game was on account of Beyond Ghibli's terrific video essay about it, drawing overt comparisons between it and Princess Mononoke. But there's another kind of Miyazaki film which has gone overlooked in all this. The slice of life, the urban fantasy. I am, of course, talking about Kiki's Delivery Service. Myself and many others have wanted a video game in the vein of Kiki's Delivery Service for a long time, one which captures that classic anime vibe with creative flight mechanics, an enthralling urban fantasy setting, and a plucky, if not slightly out-of-her-depth hero to pilot the entire thing. So when I first caught wind of a game called Mika and the Witch's Mountain, I was understandably pretty pumped. So how is it? Does it live up to those lofty expectations? I'm not going to bury the lead here, the answer is no. It's a sweet, charming indie game, but it was missing a lot of the crucial vibes. Moreover, it doesn't do as much with its flying mechanic as it can, and it gets kind of repetitive after a while. So as far as our quest for slice-of-life Ghibli likes goes, we're back to the drawing board. But then, as I was thinking about Mika and what it is that didn't click with me, I realised, hang on a minute, there already exists a game with a classic anime vibe, a plucky but out-of-her-depth hero, a rich and detailed urban fantasy setting, as well as fun and variable flight mechanics. Hell, it even has a black cat. It's called Gravity Rush. Gravity Rush is a weird game to talk about. Sometimes it feels a bit like a fever dream, this odd little cult title that released with little fanfare to the PS Vita, a handheld console which, itself, released to little fanfare. And yet, somehow, the game features a lot of polish, and even secured a sequel. A terrific sequel, might I add. And through it all, I know no one personally who's actually played it other than myself. So that's what I'm here to talk about today. If you're a fan of Gravity Rush, you're probably lapping up what little representation you can get, and if you've got no idea what it is or are only familiar with it in passing, then get ready for yapping because we're going deep with this one. I think what makes Gravity Rush stand out, and what makes it a cut above other Ghibli-likes that I've mentioned, is that thing about tone, about atmosphere. In my opinion, atmosphere is half the battle, and without it, it just doesn't scratch that energy that we all crave. We're going to be going into this in a lot more detail throughout this video, but you can tell just by looking at it, Gravity Rush has immaculate vibes. The sights and the sounds of these games make them a joy to behold and memorable to those of us who actually played them. That said, vibes, atmosphere, tone, these are all floaty, nebulous terms that can't really be pinned down to any singular thing. Nothing about Gravity Rush can be pinned down to any singular thing. So, if you'll join me, I'd like to take you through everything that this little hidden gem has to offer, why I think it's worth talking about, and why it's worth playing even now, 7 years after its last installment. In either case, hello and welcome to Curmudgeon Media. My name's Tom, and today we're going to be doing a little deep dive into the magical and underappreciated world of Gravity Rush. Oh, and we got the intro wrapped up in under 10 minutes this time. Neat. At this point, I've talked a big game about how good Gravity Rush is without actually explaining what Gravity Rush is. So yeah, what is it exactly? Well, Gravity Rush is a sort of anime-esque, French-inspired, open-world superhero game in which you use gravity powers to fly around, fight things, and otherwise do superhero-y business in a lavishly designed sandbox. You play as Kat, a mysterious amnesiac who wakes up one day amidst the bustling Parisian metropolis of Hexville, which is suspended around a gigantic pillar in the sky. Kat is imbued with gravity powers by a magic black cat, your companion for the game, and sets about fighting evil, solving problems, and otherwise just being a lovable and identifiable pilot for this kind of story. Kat, being an amnesiac, is the perfect anchor point for the audience. She knows as much as we know at any given time, which is nothing, so seeing the world through her eyes allows us to discover Hexville at a natural pace. I'll have a lot more to say about Kat later on, and the larger plot as well, what little of it there is, but for now, all you need to know is that she's just great. Now, you probably noticed a hint of sarcasm in what I just said, which I don't normally do when talking at length about a thing that I love. To be quite honest, Gravity Rush is kind of messy. I'm not going to pretend it's flawless. It's a masterpiece, I genuinely believe that, but it's also messy. Gravity Rush really is the poster child for the phrase, more than the sum of its parts. It's easy pickings for pedantic critics and people with no soul, because if you take any one of its flaws in isolation, it makes the game look worse than it actually is. But when you take all of the things together as a single collective clump, the general experience of playing it is so potent and unique. Gravity Rush begins with this guy, Keiichiro Toyama. You might recognize him from having created a couple of notable titles, like, oh shit, this guy created Silent Hill. That's about as topical as this video's gonna get. I just need it to be known that I started writing this script, like, months ago, sort of like around the time when the Silent Hill 2 remake came out, and that is officially not topical anymore because it takes so damn long to make these videos, but yeah, whatever. But before any of that, before Silent Hill or any of the other games that he worked on, like Siren, he wanted to work on Gravity Rush. Toyama studied as an art student at Tokyo Zoukei University, and it was at this stage that the very first glimmers of Gravity Rush as an idea would come to life. As he put it, before joining Konami, I already had this idea, but it wasn't too specific. I didn't have any idea about manipulating gravity back then, but I had an idea of a girl floating in the air. I'd been nurturing the idea since I was a student. I loved games since I was a kid, and I played games all the time during my school days. I studied design at an art university, but I was not very good at analog typesetting and layout at the time, so I was immersed in the digital expression of games. After that, it was a natural progression to step into the game industry. So, Toyama would initially join Konami as a graphic artist. Early in his tenure at the company, another franchise that you might have heard of became a massive overnight sensation, a little ditty called Resident Evil. Riding the coattails of this sudden explosion in video game horror, Konami asked Toyama if he wanted to do a horror game, and thus begat Silent Hill. At this point, the dream of turning Gravity Rush, which was still nothing more than a vague idea of a game, into reality was beginning to fade into obscurity, as Toyama was put to work on more horror titles. He seems to have been somewhat incensed by this bottlenecking. I was labelled as the horror game guy. But as the gaming industry continued to pursue massive advancements in graphical technologies, horror games became less and less of an appealing idea from a business perspective. With advanced technologies, HD and stuff like that, making horror games with a limited audience isn't really cost efficient. So I thought I just want to make something that I wanted to make when I was a student studying art. Finally, the opportunity to show people I can make something different came up, and I got to make Gravity Rush. During its earliest stages of development, Gravity Rush was originally planned for the PlayStation 3 under the title Gravite. I have no idea how it's meant to be pronounced, so I'm running with Graffiti. Before the PS3 was even released, Toyama had already started to consider planning Gravite by using the 6-axis motion control functionality of the upcoming console's DualShock 3 controller. There, he combined the idea of gravity control with his love of French comic books, and something like the prototype of Gravity Days was born. At long last, the little idea nugget of a girl floating in the air would actually become something. But that image, that amorphous idea of a person suspended in midair, actually came from something earlier. Chiefly, Toyama is an avid fan of the late, great Moebius, a French graphic artist famed for his surrealist and science fiction comic books. Talking about the man's work, Toyama draws attention to one aspect in particular. In one of his graphic novels, there are images of people floating in space, and I was inspired by that. What Toyama is alluding to here is Moebius's 1981 comic series, The Incal. There's an image in that comic where the protagonist is launched from a skyscraper. This panel captures his moment of freefall, framed by the dense metropolis around him. It's this moment right here which would plant the seed for the entire concept of the game. According to Toyama, the entire worldview of Gravity Rush was actually created with Moebius in mind. I think the influence of Moebius on Toyama's work speaks to a kind of retro feel that you'll find in Gravity Rush from top to bottom. More than that, Toyama has spoken multiple times about his aim to recapture the kind of tone and energy of 1970s anime. While doing the project, I borrowed all sorts of animation styles back from the 1970s when I was a kid. What I had in mind for Gravity Days was a highly entertaining hero story that everyone can enjoy, like in 70s anime. In many ways, I think that's where the Ghibli energy starts to arise, seeing how Hayao Miyazaki was coming up in the industry in the 1970s. It's all good and well to have this small inkling of an idea, the absolute bare bones of a could-be game, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those ideas will translate to reality. Once a core concept of the game, a free-roaming action-adventure game centered around gravity manipulation, was established, a specific outline was created, and prototypes began. So at this point, it's time to create a demo and see how this image can be brought into fruition. The senior game designer on the project, Okura Jr., explained at CEDC 2012 that the first prototype was instrumental to the game's development. It was the point at which they were going to find out if movement using gravity change is fun, and whether or not this project is worth sinking money into in the first place. To answer these questions, they slapped together a rudimentary demo program with a stand-in city model and put the ideas to the test. What they discovered was interesting. Toyama had initially envisioned a game with strong battle elements, with players defeating enemies to collect materials, manipulating gravity to pave the way for the protagonist, and so on. What they found during the prototyping stage, though, is that the gravity traversal itself made for a compelling central mechanic, more so perhaps than the combat, which would be added later. In other words, the simple act of floating around and falling with style, if you will, was actually a lot of fun all by itself. Going back to Okura's talk at CEDC 2012, it was found that standing on walls and flying through structures is fun, and if there's an attractive city with a sense of existence, it seems fun to freely explore it. It was proven that gravity manipulation could be a main element of the game. As we repeated the test play many times, the talk came out that the part where you can fly around freely is interesting, so I want to do that alone. In that respect, Toyama names Crackdown as one of the biggest influences on the game. I really like the aspect of unlocking skills and becoming more powerful, and achieving a higher level of freedom as you become more powerful, plus the open world setting. I enjoyed moving in that game. After hammering down that core basic principle of the gravity-based movement system, the team took to putting together a variety of bare-bones basic maps to bounce the model around in. At this point, it became abundantly clear that the optimal place to set this game would be a city, a sprawling vertical metropolis with a clear sense of up and down. In a game where the direction of gravity changes constantly due to gravity manipulation, it's easy to lose the sense of up and down. So what's the basis for the player to judge which direction is down? What the developers did for Gravity Rush was simply submerge the player in enough visual information to constantly find their bearings. The more of that visual information you have, the easier it becomes to make a split-second observation of what direction you're going in. In this respect, in a complex structure like a town, there are countless clues to find the direction, such as the shape of buildings, signs, people walking, etc. In Gravity Rush, Hexville is designed with maximum verticality. We'll speak more on that later because there's a lot more going on here than simply helping to orient the player, but nevertheless, the immediate verticality of the setting was clearly designed with this sense of orientation in mind. A clear attempt by the devs to manufacture this playground to be ideal for gravity-based traversal. On top of that, there's an abundance of other urban fixtures which create a sense of up and down in your periphery, signs on buildings, railway networks, and of course, the copious population of floating cars that cover both the vertical and horizontal plane and make it much easier to tell from a glance which way you're floating. Simply put, when something that should be straight comes into view, the brain recognizes that that is the correct up and down. Even in the design of the map, you basically place familiar things and make them look sideways or upside down, which makes it easier to express the sense of up and down. That said, the addition of a simple reset button to fix your orientation is still appreciated though. Over a year into prototyping for Gravity Rush, Toyama and his team would see a sudden shift in direction. That is, the imminent release of Sony's new gaming handheld, the PS Vita, which required some swanky launch titles. The way Toyama puts it is that the new hardware started moving, and at that point, the planning for Gravity Rush finally got serious. I think what's being suggested here is that a niche title like Gravity Rush may have ended up forever in development limbo were it not for the added incentive of the PS Vita needing games to play on it. So, in spite of how mid the Vita was, I guess there's that, at least. Keiichiro Toyama's directorial style, now that the game had entered full swing, is best described as holistic. In his own words, I think it's very important to make sure that everyone on the team thinks, I can make my own decisions and act. To this end, Toyama's approach to directing his development team is much more nurturing of their own sensibilities and flavors, not necessarily letting them get off assignment, so to speak. But it is to say that he appreciated and valued the individual talents and perspectives of the people working within his management to make a great game. In the art book, it's explained that Toyama would outline the concept, but would basically allow creative freedom so long as it fit within the brackets of that idea. This kind of freeing design philosophy seems to have been pretty encouraging to the devs. Toyama puts it like, "For me, it was like the production site of a movie or a TV series. There's an art director, there's a lighting director, a scriptwriter, actors, and by making use of each person's strengths, unexpectedness is born. I think that there are naturally going to be benefits to this kind of philosophy, as well as drawbacks. There's very much a throw everything at the wall to see what sticks style of direction here, which can occasionally risk the game lacking the cohesion of a strong central author that the rest of the team can rally around. Particularly in the story department, the game does occasionally feel like they're kind of making it up as they go along. There are notoriously quite a few instances where Dusty the cat will come and go as he pleases, thus robbing Cat of her gravity powers as and when the devs want her to be underpowered for specific segments of the game, rather than finding a way for those moments to arise naturally. There are also a lot of different side plots which fade away as quickly as they appear. Now, to be clear, I don't actually think that this style of narrative writing is wholly invalid, and, we'll get to that in more detail later when we talk about the story. I know I'm really procrastinating talking about the story, but I genuinely think it's best if we just save that for later, because it's kind of hard to talk about the story without proper context. Nevertheless, I also think that Toyama's laissez-faire approach to direction meant that the central gravity mechanics of the game ended up so much more fleshed out than they would have otherwise. Or, as he puts it, the basic principle of controlling gravity has not changed for Cat, but every time a new staff member joins, the direction changes in various ways. So before we move on, I do want to just talk a little bit about the gravity movement in this game, because I can imagine it being a bit of a hurdle for some new players or old players who picked it up once and never quite got on with it. The gravity flight that the devs designed for this game rides a delicate line between flying and falling. Because that's the thing, right? Like, you're adjusting the direction that gravity pulls you, you aren't flying per se. One of my favourite descriptions I ever read about Gravity Rush was from this review, and it describes the movement as hard to learn but easy to master, and I stand by this assessment. To me, this is what makes it worthwhile as a central gameplay mechanic. The movement relies a lot on inertia. Since you aren't flying, the actual gameplay is comprised of pointing yourself in one direction, falling towards it, stopping, readjusting your path from there, and so on. I know this sounds clunky on the surface, and to some it might be, but in practice I've always found it to be a fun skill to learn, and that's what keeps it engaging. Eventually the process of zigzagging through the city will become second nature, even more so when the game starts challenging you to use those skills to actually, do stuff. I am 100% of the Yahtzee Croshaw mindset that there's a real joy to be found in games which put their traversal mechanics front and center, both as the focal point of the fun and as a skill to be learned. This goes for anything from Jet Set Radio to Spider-Man to Mirror's Edge. In my opinion, this is one of the many places that Mika and the Witch's Mountain went wrong, where the game quickly becomes repetitive and the actual act of flying is far too basic to be fun on its own for long stretches of time. You know what? Actually, pull up a dang seat, we're going into this. Across Gravity Rush and its sequel, a lot is done with gravity as a traversal mechanic. Early on in the game's development, Toyama began to realise a bit of a trap in the allure of this gravity flight thing that they had going on. It's true that flying around feels good, but if that's all there is to it, it's rough. As such, the team really devised 3 core ways of moving in a Gravity Rush game. The first is, of course, the actual gravity flight itself, which I've already expanded upon in some detail. The second is just plain old walking, which you're going to use mostly during combat when you need more control over, slighter, smaller movements. And the third, and my personal favourite, is the gravity slide. This power, which shifts gravity so that every surface you touch is like a slope, isn't as fast in one direction as flying is, but it carries with it a lot more momentum and control for those sharp angles. What I find so immensely satisfying about the gravity slide is that you just hold down one button and lightly tap left or right to control. The only thing that's going to kill your momentum is if you hit something or if you release your finger from that button. Between all that, you can just jump to change surfaces or avoid small obstacles, and the rest is just good, clean motion. And this really does exemplify that principle of hard to learn but easy to master, because if you're anything like me at least, as soon as you get that bug, that itch to keep a single continuous string of movement going for as long as possible, there's really no turning back. And the animation is so weighty and grounded, it really just hits something deep in my brain. Flying and sliding are both situational, but learning when is and is not the right time to use either and switching between them fluidly is really a big part of how this game succeeds in the traversal department. And this only gets better and deeper in Gravity Rush 2, which made the brilliant decision to add 2 new gravity modes instead of the one that you had in the first game. That is to say, you get the low gravity mode, where everything is light and floaty like you're walking on the moon, and the high gravity mode, where everything is heavy and clunky like you're Rock Lee before he takes off the training weights. The way that you switch between these gravity modes is just f***ing fantastic, to be honest. It's so easy and effortless. What you do is swipe up or down on the little, gamepad thingy in the center of the controller. I'm actually obsessed with this because it's one of the only times this useless piece of controller real estate was utilized in a way that made the most of it. I'll start with the high gravity mode, or Jupiter mode, first because I find it less relevant to traversal and more so to the combat. As for how it affects movement, it really only has a handful of small but meaningful effects. Your jumping is a lot shallower, of course, and your foot speed is inevitably slower, but when you're traveling long distances, the heavier gravity mode will catapult you much faster in a straight line, but your mid-air mobility is severely limited in return. But the real kicker here is that the heavier gravity makes it so that your gravity slide is way faster. That alone is enough to justify the existence of other gravity modes for me. All of the satisfying weight and the speed and the momentum of the gravity slide is enhanced. I'd find myself switching to the heavy gravity mode a lot just to make use of this function. The low gravity mode, or lunar mode, makes your flight slower, but it introduces a really fun new way of traversing the denser metropolitan areas of the game. Since your character's gravity is so low, you can jump a lot higher, faster. Holding X will allow you to jump straight upwards to achieve massive verticality in a matter of seconds, and if you do this same maneuver while pushing the analog stick in a specific horizontal direction, you'll launch yourself in that direction with great speed. On top of all of this, the weaker gravity of the lunar mode allows you to sort of floaty bounce around the city, wall jumping off the skyscrapers to make the most of the sandbox. These two gravity modes, when combined, really blow the whole open world environment wide open. Lunar mode, as you can guess, is amazing for nimbly exploring the metropolis when the buildings and landmarks are more packed together, so you can bounce off of them and use them to gain elevation and distance. But then it's not quite so effective for covering larger distances between floating islands, so you can mitigate this by using both gravity styles in tandem. You can launch using the lunar mode rocket jump and then switch to Jupiter mode mid-flight and let it carry you the rest of the distance. All of this is to say that a significant amount of emphasis is put into the simple act of moving in these games. I really don't feel like a game needs to elaborate on that either. I just think it's kind of neat. It's sort of its own art form, its own skill to be learned, and it makes these games a joy to play on the most basic, tactile, moment-to-moment basis. But what I love most about all of this is that it isn't just kind of left there for you to figure out on your own. Sure, you can figure it out at a pace that you see fit, but the developers did actually craft a game which engenders the player to really engage with these mechanics in a meaningful way. Or, as Toyama would put it, the gravity action in this game is very versatile, so by adding some conditions, you can create a variety of different gameplay options. For example, a time attack. The challenge missions offer plenty of such options. What Toyama is referring to here is what I genuinely consider to be the backbone of Gravity Rush and its sequel. At the center of these games you have the main story. This is delivered to you by a marker on your map, you go to that marker, you press a button, and the story progresses. But at the same time, you have an array of optional missions and challenge modes that you can engage with in between the main story missions. These challenge modes take on a variety of shapes and forms. Flight races, slide races, freeform races, combat time attacks, and other miscellaneous tasks like delivering papers or transporting people from place to place. My very favourite of these is a side mission in Gravity Rush 2 where you play frisbee with a dog. And if I'm not misremembering, I think you get a charm from completing that, which makes all the dogs in any given vicinity approach you. I mean, this is just peak game design, I don't know what else to say. There are actually two layers to why I think this kind of game design is brilliant. One of them is mechanical and the other is narrative. On a mechanical level, what the level designers are doing is basically training you, right? Like, that's what this is. They're creating a playground in which the skill of navigating the sandbox is constantly being challenged and owned. It's low pressure and it's entirely non-committal. You can try and retry these challenge missions as often as you like to achieve the highest score, and so on. These challenge modes carry additional incentives beyond just training you though. I mean, let's face it, there are plenty of people out there, dare I say the majority, who will avoid side quests and challenge missions like the dang plague. Hell, I was one of those people when I first played this game. But these people are going to find the game objectively harder to play. The reason for this is twofold. The first and most obvious reason is the prizes that you would otherwise be missing out on by not doing them. That is, the precious gems that you achieve by getting bronze, silver, and gold medals for every challenge mission. Precious gems serve a lot of purposes in Gravity Rush, but summarily, they're just the game world's currency, and they're what you use to pay for upgrades to your power set. As soon as you get access to that skill tree, collecting these gems becomes your prerogative, and there is no better nor faster way to attain them than through the game's challenge missions. The prize for each bronze, silver, and gold medal is only achievable once, but the rewards are cumulative. So if you only earn bronze on your first attempt, you can try again until you get silver and gold as well, or if you absolutely nail it first try, you can walk away with all three prize amounts at once. The second reason requires a little bit more explaining. When we took a look at that skill tree earlier, you'll have noticed this little bar down here. This right here is your reputation, and it is effectively the game's leveling up system. I find it to be very interesting. Each of Kat's main skills, both in traversal and in combat, are locked behind her reputation. The better her reputation, the more of these skills she'll have access to. What's crucial to understand about the reputation bar is that it doesn't increase in the standard way that an experience bar does in other games. For example, if you're playing Fallout New Vegas, you'll gain X amount of experience for finding a new location or completing quests, defeating foes, and so on, and then when you reach a certain threshold, you can level up. Leveling up then gives you skill points that you can spend on specific abilities with which to progress through the game. Or if you're playing Skyrim, you have additional substats that just increase in level every time you use them. When you swing that big claymore at a Draugr Deathlord, your two-handed skill goes up, provided the blade actually connects. Gravity Rush works in neither of the above ways. There are two ways Kat's reputation is going to increase. The first is by completing story missions, both the main story and the side stories, but these alone won't be enough to buff out that reputation stat. There's one other thing you'll need to do if you want to increase that level cap. That is, invest your own precious gems into unlocking facilities throughout the game's overworld. These facilities can look like a lot of different things: a small cannery, or a factory, or a public transport depot, or simple public water fountains. Unlocking these facilities and landmarks provides you with more than just reputation points with the city folk though. Doing so unlocks new challenge missions to play on your downtime between the main story missions, which means more precious gems, which means more skills to make use of the increased level cap. There is a lot that I love about this design choice. I think it's f***ing brilliant. Let's talk about why. I don't think that it's a random decision at all to taper Kat's growth proportionally to the way the city feels about her, or more accurately, how much effort she puts into engaging with the city. As Toyama would have it, she develops throughout the game in terms of gameplay and also the story. People in the city start to accept her. Throughout the game, Kat is shaped by the broader society, and this matters. On your first ever playthrough, the opening few minutes of the game are quite telling. You wake up in this unknown urban landscape, and after a brief bit of tutorializing, you're already unwittingly put to work rescuing people. What becomes immediately apparent from the offset is that this city is not receptive to newcomers. In fact, it's not receptive to many things, and there's a reason for that. Crippled by a neglectful and despotic government which has done little to quell an ongoing string of natural disasters that are quite literally ripping people away from their families, the general sort of zeitgeist is a negative one. It doesn't feel fair to be treated with derision and suspicion, but it does make sense, and you want to change that. Something that always bothered me about modern superhero media, or anything along those lines, is that people don't seem to matter all that much. In modern MCU films, for example, the city or the world and its inhabitants are secondary to the spectacle. They're the backdrop, a playground in which the heroes can cause unimaginable amounts of collateral damage, or just generally do very little to, save people. The worst offender, of course, is Man of Steel from back in 2013. I don't feel like I need to elaborate on this. In this sense, there's a lot of confusion about why superheroes exist as a concept. The idea of doing good has become conflated with just punching big things and battling villains. One of the worst writers of all time, Blake Snyder, once wrote an entire screenwriting manual named Save the Cat, titled for one of its early passages which reflects, perhaps intentionally, perhaps not, Richard Donner's seminal 1978 Superman film. In the opening of that film, Superman saves a cat from a tree. What Snyder would take away from this kind of character writing is quite simply, if you show the character doing a thing that's good, the audience knows the character is good. But what Snyder fails to account for in literally any way is that this scene shows us a lot more than that. I don't want to harp on this for too long because this amazing scene has been talked about many times, but I do want to just point out that it shows us what Superman's relationship is to the city of Metropolis. It's not just about battling evil, it's not just about fighting Lex Luthor and so on and so forth. It's about being there for the people that need him, standing up for the weak and the underrepresented. Part of what I love about Gravity Rush is that it succeeds in doing exactly that. Kat's relationship to the broader city never stops being relevant. It's literally hard-baked into her leveling system. Moreover, the choice to specifically add in these peripheral ways of increasing her reputation, like reopening public facilities, it all feels so socially minded. The city and its people quickly become something that you're actively invested in while playing as Kat. The city is a character, and the developers ensure that you foster a relationship to it. In that same sense, it's not accidental that the main plot of the first game sees you rescuing various sections of the city from the brink of oblivion, and reunifying the urban landscape, an act which is always deeply rooted in rediscovering missing people and reactivating the city's public transportation network. But we can put a pin in that for now. Like I said, we'll come back to the story in more detail later. Something which Gravity Rush 1 and 2 fold into this, although admittedly the sequel does it better and more, is adding just enough context to these little side challenges. For example, it's not just a challenge mode where you're using gravity-throwing powers for target practice. It's a miniature story where you're helping a small printing business with their paper route. Or, alternatively, it's not just a flying race, but one in which you're playing with a local street kid and his pet seagull. It's all very Yakuza adjacent. I think this is one of the major aspects of Gravity Rush which lends it so comfortably to that slice-of-life, Studio Ghibli, Kiki's Delivery Service charm. Those movies which relax on the central narrative and don't mind meandering from time to time around these little side plots. Helping an old lady make a pot pie, learning how to unwind with a painter in the forest, and so on and so forth. Gravity Rush 2, like I said, has a lot more going on in this department. If I were to criticise it for anything, it would be that these missions themselves can skew a little heavier on the deliver thing to person rhythm, but these little detours often provide a really important opportunity to see how the different social classes within the society regard one another. More on that later. The challenges themselves are fun little pockets of action on their own, but they do come packaged with micro-narratives that increase the player's sense of relationship to the city and make it feel like a livelier and more populated place. And hey, I'm not about to pretend that this is groundbreaking storytelling or anything like that, but I do think that it coheres with the general ethos of the game design and makes it so that playing in this sandbox feels like a more full and lived-in experience. All of these settlements and districts have personality, and we feel like we have a relationship to them. But of course, there are other, more ancillary methods to obtaining these gems than just the challenge missions and side quests. Very much in the free-spirited, throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks methodology of the game's development, Gravity Rush also has collectathon elements. Very retro, I must say. This is truly a design choice which feels very behind the times, but honestly, I kind of love it, and it really feeds into the same ethos of expanding the player's relationship to the city, although in a more physical, navigational kind of way. Every district of both cities you can explore in the Gravity Rush games is littered with these little precious gems. They adorn the walls, windows, ledges, rooftops, arches, domes, railway lines, and even the underbelly of the city itself. They are everywhere, and the thing is that when the human brain collects the shiny thing and it makes the sparkle and the sound, we want to keep collecting the shiny thing. It becomes obsessive. Again, if you're anything like me, you're at great risk of spending an inordinate amount of downtime between story missions just scouring every nook and cranny of the overworld trying to maximize your gem count. You just need enough to get that next skill level, but then you do it and realize there's a whole deposit of gems through the arcades and the walkways and yeah, obsessive. You collect all the gems in one district, and then they renew after a certain amount of story is completed, but this time the gems are bigger and worth more, and then you unlock other parts of the city, and the cycle continues. So what effect does this have? Well, the obvious. It makes you extremely familiar with the city on a physical level. The spaces don't just bleed into one another, you actually begin developing this internal, vague catalogue of where things are in relation to one another, one which only expands in detail the more often that you traverse these routes and spend time in this city. I think this applies a bit more to Hexville in Gravity Rush than it does to Yerga Paralao in Gravity Rush 2. The former has a much more clustered, tightly packed architecture to it than the latter's broader sensibilities, chopped up into more self-contained islands. But nevertheless, when you're actually playing the game, you start to really notice it. Like, sure, yeah, there are objective markers that point you in the direction that you're going, but I'm telling you, you'll notice it. The number of times that there'll just be an objective marker that vaguely points into the center of a landmass, and you can't just brute force your way through in a straight line. You'll start internalizing the interior walls and passageways of the Undercity. It'll start making sense to you in a less abstract, more practical sense. I think this matters. I think that this fundamentally alters the way that you view the space. It's like how everyone who's played Skyrim for any length of time has an optimal path that they take from the entry gates of Whiterun to the Cloud District. We've talked an awful lot at this point about the way the game is designed in order to facilitate the player's engagement with the city itself, even on a social level. I'm not going to pretend like what Gravity Rush is doing in this regard is rocket science. It's far from being the most comprehensive urban space in a video game. I personally would give that award to the Hong Kong level in Deus Ex, but I digress. This is where we come back to that idea of Gravity Rush as more than the sum of its parts. Because the social fabric of Gravity Rush, for lack of a better term, is hard-baked into the artistic design of the settings in both games. So, as we know, the game devs created these worlds to be navigated with gravity, with a high level of both horizontal and vertical freedom. As such, they designed the city with multiple levels of layers and structures. But this naturally works in tandem with the social aspects of the city as well. After all, the player's arc in Gravity Rush and its sequel fundamentally represent the economic disparities and environmental issues of the real world. In the world of hierarchical structure, people from the lower class suffered from hardships and poverty. In contrast, people from the upper class were given first priority to their possessions and safety. And because of this, I think that the verticality of these cityscapes works both on a gameplay level and on the level of conveying a sense of social class to the player. In the uppermost districts, you've got the fast-paced, bougie, and metropolitan areas of the city, and then below, among the pipes and valleys and depths, the poorest members of society make their homes. It's these areas where Kat makes her first impression, carving out a life for herself in an abandoned ventilation pipe. The city of Yurga-Paralau demonstrates this concept much more clearly. Much like Hexville, the city is divided into 4 distinct districts. At the very bottom, you've got Le Elgona, the houseboat fleet. The light from above barely reaches this part of the city. It's a shanty town, rife with poverty and sickness, and underrepresented by the government, and protected chiefly by gangs. Above that, you've got the most populous district of the city, Le Kolmozna. This is the market district of the city, and is thus the epicenter of life and movement in Yurga-Paralau. While certainly not the picture of affluence, commerce is bustling and active here, while all sorts of people try to get by. Newsagents, food stalls, hole-in-the-wall general stores, and other shops that keep the city lively. Overlooking the industrial district of Le Kolmozna is the old settlement, Le Havina. This picturesque and idyllic cluster of mansions and high society is reserved for only the wealthiest inhabitants of Yurga-Paralau. Its people are sheltered and standoffish, and the breadth of the disparity between them and the denizens of Le Elgona is impossible not to think about. The only thing higher than the old settlement is Avarash Aurgavena, the central authority of Yurga-Paralau's militarist government. Nevertheless, I think it's high time we got to my favourite part and started talking about the visual design of these spaces and beyond. Gravity Rush and Gravity Rush 2's city settings are designed thoughtfully and meaningfully. It's difficult not to be a little spellbound by these places on a purely visual level. They're so immediately lively and striking. They're just the right amount of cluttered without being overwhelming. At all times, Hexville and Yurga-Paralau feel densely populated and thriving. Something which came as absolutely no surprise to me while researching for this video is that the setting illustrations created for Gravity Rush were not only abundant and detailed, but also taken very seriously as a footing for transforming these spaces into a 3D render that you can explore. Something that was repeatedly hammered home by the art director, Yoshiaki Yamaguchi, is that the background information had to feel alive. The key word, living background, he says, was one of the most important concepts in the art design of this game. He goes on to outline the importance of a sense of reality in the art direction of Gravity Rush, that the world they create has to feel that it is a real world. So, what's going on here? Living background, real world, etc. The best word to describe this phenomenon is verisimilitude, which basically means reality or likeness to reality. The degree to which art, stories, literature, and so on possess a sense of authenticity, plausibility, believability, or as Yamaguchi puts it best in saying, to make the background feel real, it's necessary to give the player a lot of information. Humans have a tendency to simplify the background if there's not enough information in it. And the moment they judge the background to be just a picture, they completely lose their perception. That is to say, when our suspension of disbelief collapses and that sense of reality, that sense of verisimilitude falters, we begin to lose our engagement with the thing. Toyama outlines one of the best examples of this in an interview with Gematsu. The main setting of this work is a large city, and even a single sign is made in great detail. The images shown on street TVs are also some kind of incident that's happening in the world of the work. Yamaguchi's philosophy is that the art design of a project is more than just pictures, but about making the player feel. To do so, the city is designed in such a way that the player is constantly provided with sensory information. The player feels that it's a real world. They have a sense of being present in that place. The background needs to continue to provide the user with information about movement and change, just as if it were alive. The artbook is littered with these kinds of textual details. The signs in particular can take up entire pages upon pages. I've always loved the signs in particular because they don't just show that people live here, they show that people have worked out an entire infrastructure for how they get around, directions and transit laws that they follow, codes of conduct for transporting themselves from place to place. This especially tracks in Gravity Rush, in which the sky is constantly aflutter with domestic flying vehicles. These vehicles, too, are designed with an equal level of thought, the smaller, more European sensibilities of the cars of Hexville contrasting the larger units of Yerga Paralau, which are almost all designed to carry some kind of cargo. The world of Yerga Paralau is a whole lot less physically connected than Hexville, after all. There's a world in Gravity Rush, one which has existed before we arrived, and which will continue to exist regardless. Toyama once said in an interview that Hexville is largely modelled after the streets of Northern and Eastern Europe, with both old buildings and modern vehicles. It's a place where anything goes. This might be what makes it so evocative of Kuriko from Kiki's Delivery Service, which itself is a mishmash of London, Lisbon, Paris, Amsterdam, and probably more that I'm just plain old forgetting. And looking at the various districts of Hexville, you can certainly detect wafts of Bruges or Warsaw, with its streets divided by canals and valleys, or the large, blocky skyscrapers of Vendor Center. There's one monument in the downtown area which I particularly love because it's sort of like, what if we took the Arc de Triomphe, mixed it with Big Ben, and just made it really big and long? Don't laugh. But actually, Big Ben is the name of the bell and the building is called— Yeah, I know, Jesus f***ing Christ, I can't take you people anywhere. But above all else, Hexville has an immediately palpable Parisian sensibility to it. From its street-level verandas, facades, mansard rooftops, Art Nouveau-style posters and placards, to its French-inspired naming conventions. Old Noir has no proper French translation, of course. None of these words do. It's supposed to mean Old Town or Old District, but it evokes that same vibe. Toyama supposedly created the entire worldview of Gravity Rush with Jean-Giraud Mobius in mind, and you can certainly feel it in the architectural design. The city of Hexville also brought out some of Mobius's best and strangest ideas. While the world is reminiscent of an older time in Europe, it makes sure to add enough of a science fiction vibe. Its larger inspiration was brought to life in 1976's The Long Tomorrow by Dan O'Bannon and Mobius, which featured a similar cityscape that evoked a feeling of familiarity in an otherwise completely fictional world. In scanning the pages of The Long Tomorrow, you can imagine Toyama's neurons firing at the sight of it. Through every deep, cavernous gorge, connected by walkways and pipes, the very same ideas echo between the streets of Old Noir. Even the simple and pastel colour palette of Gravity Rush's skyline feels like it can be traced back to this comic book. You can certainly see that living background at play here as well. Every page is so rich in detail. The neon lights and bar signs and floating traffic and storm drains and the grime and grit and dirt don't go undrawn. Even the plain, unwalked footways at night are brought to life by litter and residue left behind by a rush hour you can picture in your brain. But there's another angle of Frenchness to this. You can see just by looking at it how the emphasis on symmetrical brickwork, decorative archways, and elaborate ornamentation really live and breathe French classicism. It feels at once decidedly modern and retro, incorporating exactly the kind of futurist elements that you'd find in Mobius's work and marrying it with 18th and 19th century Paris. But where Gravity Rush's setting design really finds its most immaculate vibes is in the famous Haussmann renovation of Paris, which is basically the thing that gives Paris that look to it. 9 times out of 10, when a person uses the word Parisian, they're referring to the architecture that resulted from Haussmann's renovations. But don't worry, I'm going to explain what all of this means. So, the Haussmann renovations were a large-scale, vast, and comprehensive program of public architectural work commissioned by Napoleon III, which basically completely overhauled Paris between 1853 and 1870. The French capital, Kim Wilshire writes, was overcrowded, dingy, dirty, and riddled with disease. The plan was to basically refurbish Paris, modernising it with wider streets and squares and sewage systems and all of that jazz. The long and wide avenues of Paris don't find their way into Gravity Rush. They have no reason to, given the skybound nature of its public and private transport. When everything floats, what use are wide streets? But the attention to broad public squares, the large uniform faces and gradual corners, and of course the iconic mansard rooftop, known colloquially as the French rooftop, which is a striking and distinctive feature for Hexville's immaculate metropolitan vibes. Throughout the video thus far, we've talked at times about the social structure depicted in Gravity Rush and its sequel, the constant and deliberate attention given to social hierarchy and wealth disparity. I think that drawing such inspiration from French architecture is interesting in that sense. Maybe not deliberate, but certainly interesting. France has a long, colourful, and often sordid history of revolution and class struggle, and this is a theme equally pertinent to the very Haussmann renovations which would give Hexville its design. The Haussmann renovations were executed by and named for Baron Georges-Eugène Haussmann, prefect of Seine, and a man of much controversy. Quote, France remains divided over whether the man who transformed Paris into the City of Light was truly a master planner or an imperialist megalomaniac. To his Republican compatriots, Haussmann was an arrogant, autocratic vandal who ripped the historic heart out of Paris, driving his boulevards through the city's slums to help the French army crush popular uprisings. Haussmann was also accused of social engineering by destroying the economically mixed areas where rich and poor rubbed shoulders, instead creating distinct, wealthy, and popular arrondissements. That last comment is fascinating to me, and something which is definitely folded into the physical layout of Gravity Rush's city spaces, ones which, as I already explained, are rigidly divided into districts based on wealth and class. But yeah, once again, put a pin in that for now. I promise we'll come back to all of this class stuff when we get to talk about the plot. I promise, just stick with me here. The design philosophy when it came to Jurgen Parallel was completely and totally different. In a good way, of course. Where Hexville feels decidedly European with an emphasis on France, Jurgen Parallel takes us across the Pacific. Jurgen Parallel was also difficult, says Toyama. When I was making Gravity Days 2, I had a strong impression from going to Asia and Mexico for the promotion of the previous work. I had an image of various pasts gathered in a jumble behind modern buildings. When I travelled to Vietnam, there was a time when I thought, this is it. Flying over the skyscraper district of Jurgen Parallel, I felt a tremendous sense of fulfillment. There is this immediately palpable sense of brightness and vibrance to the design of Jurgen Parallel, in contrast to the occasionally surreal colour palettes of Hexville's locales, which also take us through varying times of day. Jurgen Parallel is under a constant sheet of sunshine. According to the art book, there is almost no seasonal change, and it's always hot. The only exception to this is the poorest district, for which the sun's rays have been blocked by the metropolis above. In contrast to the ornate, classicist architecture that Hexville borrows from Paris, Jurgen Parallel has a scrappier, rougher, but more homely kind of feel to it. The buildings are of a more modern style, but also seem old and lived in. The paint is dry, chapped, and worn down, the steel shutters are slightly rusted, and everything seems to be coated in a healthy sheet of dust. The apartments themselves are segmented clearly, but also densely packed together. You can tell just by looking at some of the urban or suburban areas of Vietnam or Mexico exactly where the inspiration lies. The market district of Lake Holmosna is my favourite location in maybe any game. I f***ing love this place. The vibes are immaculate. The design is absolutely f***ing on point. I don't know why, but I really am just a sucker for signs. I mean, you get what I'm saying, right? Lake Holmosna is absolutely covered in these little billboards and placards and neon signs that poke out of the side of buildings. You never actually explore this area at night, so there's no way to know if these signs work or not. They could just be old and busted and it'd still suit the vibes. Absolutely none of it is written in a language you can understand or which has a real translation, but I think that adds to the feeling of it. You, like Kat, are a stranger here, a foreigner, out of your depth. These signs are always densely packed together into dusty arcades of shops and stores, each desperately vying for your attention. The streets are constantly alive with small, independent shops, food stalls, and paraphernalia. You're never too far from a sea of parasols that break up the colour of concrete from above. And of course, the simple addition of the humble palm tree completely alters the way our brain views this place. I don't want to fall into the trap of ethno-exoticism, but I'm English. Seeing a palm tree here helps me forget that I live in one of the greyest, most boring places on the planet. Palm trees are very much a part of tropical and subtropical climates, and the inclusion of this unassuming little piece of greenery really adds to that sense of warmth that's abundant in Yerga Paralao. And then, every so often, the boxy architecture of the marketplace is broken up by ornate domes that feel far older, like the towers of a Mexican basilica, the Catholic church buildings found throughout Mexico. The choice to include these details speaks further to that aforementioned feeling of a colonial history. This style of architectural design speaks to a vibrant society, but one which is overpopulated. And, for such an overpopulated community, the wealth is mostly hoarded by those in the upper districts. The differing architecture of the wealthy district feels a lot more Euro-American. Perhaps for this reason, you can't help but feel a certain colonial vibe while you're there, a sense which is compounded by the fact that the majority of its residents are white-skinned, in comparison to the residents in the market district who seem ethnically aligned to the Mexican and Vietnamese citizens who inspired them. Yerga Paralao is a colony, and it's made up of descendants of people who once immigrated from the mother country and neighbouring countries, so it's racially diverse. Compared to Hexville, Yerga Paralao possesses far more disparity between its richest and poorest settlements though. And then you reach the lowest, most economically deprived district of La Elgona. In stark contrast to the rich and vibrant colour palettes of the market district and old settlement above it, La Elgona is cast in greys and browns. This cluster of similar-looking huts and shacks appears to be desperately cobbled together out of wood and corrugated steel, enough to survive in, but hardly a living. I think that whatever socioeconomic themes were beginning to be teased out in Gravity Rush 1 are cranked all the way up to 11 for its sequel game. It's genuinely difficult to spend time in this area. It's deeply alienating, not just from a visual standpoint, but also a mechanical one. Treasure hunts and other side mission type beats are notoriously difficult in this area of the game for its collection of visually similar buildings that pack together in ways that obfuscate what might just be out of view. Again, you don't really have to look at La Elgona for long to understand what real-world inspiration led to its visual design. It immediately conjures the shantytowns of Mexico or Pakistan, or the Brazilian favelas, impoverished locations which result from the unequal distribution of wealth. Returning to art director Yoshiaki Yamaguchi, the overall look of Gravity Rush is one which was inspired by a French style of comic book illustration called bande dessinée. These bande dessinée are characterized by a mid-century to post-war use of simple, vibrant colour, cell shading, and thick, decisive line work. I'd say the most famous example of this would be Hergé's The Adventures of Tintin, although Hergé was unique among his peers for his simpler, cartoonier style. It's not hard to imagine, though, that Moebius was probably what Yamaguchi had in mind. That said, Yamaguchi's general apprehension towards running with that style is that it might not play so well to broader audiences, that it might be a bit too niche. So, the style that we get in Gravity Rush blends the ink and colour sensibilities of bande dessinée with the proportions and character stylings of anime, with the goal of creating something more palatable to a worldwide audience. I think it's blending these two ideas that gives Gravity Rush its distinct visual flair. The colour in particular sets it apart from other games with a more straightforward anime style, ones which run with a much poppier, more saturated colour palette. The characters themselves in Gravity Rush have a very anime appearance to them, although perhaps toned down slightly to meet that European middle ground. Smaller eyes, more shapely noses, and perhaps a greater variety of facial features. But what really sets it apart is just that colour palette, those earthy, slightly muted colours and impressionistic skyboxes that could have been pulled right out of the pages of the incal. When it comes to that use of colour, a lot is owed not to Mobius but to Yves Chaland, who provided colour to the incal. His influence is felt everywhere here. Those bizarre atmospheric skylines of yellow or green and those urban landscapes rendered in warm greys. When you think about it, the ways in which Gravity Rush and the incal were produced makes them a lot more similar in style. Both had to be made with the constraints of time and budget and platform, and these things have a direct impact on the way that they look. The incal was originally published between 1980 and 1985 in a magazine called Screaming Metal, and its visuals really have that appearance of having been made to meet the deadline and create the most detailed art possible within that time frame. The simplistic colours used to render the background is evidence of this, and I don't mean this at all to disparage the artwork. It looks incredible. It's those simple colours that give its world such a distinct atmosphere, one which Gravity Rush recreates. In the first Gravity Rush game, the constraint isn't just time but also platform. The limited power of the PS Vita compared to its cousin, the mainline PS3, has a similar effect on the game's style. The draw distance, or the distance by which far-off elements are rendered, is much shallower due to the Vita's lower processing power. As the distant models begin to fade into the surreal, matted colours of the skybox, they develop a thin line to keep them distinct and recognisable in spite of the graphical limitations. This too gives them the appearance of a soft, quickly rendered ink illustration in a 1980s French comic book. The most obvious graphical element that lends Gravity Rush towards a bande dessinée comic book vibe is its predominant use of cel shading on its character models. Yamaguchi justifies the use of cel-shaded animation in Gravity Rush in a few ways. Firstly, it captures that desired middle ground between a painted image and a real image that they enjoyed in bande dessinée comic books. Secondly, he felt that it allowed for a more expressive image, and thirdly, it's just highly compatible with games, so it's not just a comic book homage. But to be honest, I think there's a lot more to it than that. Cel shading is kind of interesting. I'm old enough to remember when its use in The Wind Waker to support that game's cartoony visual style was met with a lot of ire. In the fullness of time, though, it allowed the game to age very gracefully. Even its far later successor in Breath of the Wild is able to punch way above its own weight class against games on systems with much higher graphical fidelity because its cel-shaded visuals communicate so much panache and charm through minimalist means. Gravity Rush is no different. In lieu of cutscenes, the game favours the more budget-friendly, processing power-friendly alternative, comic strips. I'm not going to pretend like this is novel, and Lord knows other games have come under fire for doing roughly the same thing, but it does add to Gravity Rush's Mobius-esque charm. The cel-shaded style of the in-game graphics keep it only ever a stone's throw away from what we expect to find in the pages of a comic, and so the game maintains this comfortable, cozy sense of cohesion between the game world and the comic strips that patch the story together. This, in conjunction with the beautifully illustrated little character portraits, allow the characters to express themselves in ways that aren't confined by the limitations of the graphics. Okay, so I think now is as good a time as any to talk about the Gravity Queen herself, Kat. Kat is, quite frankly, one of my favourite video game heroes of all time, and her design is really wonderful. Creating a cool, interesting design for a main character is a challenge in and of itself, and here's a dev team trying their best to appeal to international tastes. Toyama explains, "The main character was the most difficult thing to lock down, so we thought a lot about it. If we made something completely Japanese, then it would be only acceptable to Japanese users and will lose audiences in other territories." Now, what they aimed to create in Kat was a character who feels powerful in spite of her short stature. Like a ninja, they say. Small but agile. You can see this reflected primarily in Kat's outfit. one which is predominantly black, broken up by smatterings of gold trim, and entirely lightweight. The primary use of black helps her to stand out against the more outlandish colours of the skybox, and her pale, blonde hair helps to distinguish Cat from the earthy tones of the cityscape. Ornamentation give it something of a European high-fashion edge without feeling obnoxious. Cat's design also feels very exotic compared to what you see around her. In fact, I'd say that the swirling metal ornamentation of her outfit feels a little bit Art Deco, something which is at odds with the more 18th to 19th century Parisian vibe of the city itself. I also want to note that Cat has a visibly darker skin tone compared to the European-coded residents of Hexville. I'm hardly going to give the game diversity points for what is still pretty clearly a light-skinned character, but dark-skinned characters are tragically so hard to find in Japanese games like this, and I'm just glad they didn't go in the Hoyoverse, Zenless Zone Zero, Genshin Impact direction of making every character whiter than the surface of the moon. Make of that what you will. Cat's outfit has a couple of cool, notable features to it. First and foremost, she has her scarf. The scarf serves a few functions. Along with her wristbands, romper, and socks, it helps to create a strong sense of form while she's hurtling through the sky. This is some pretty clever design work, honestly. The player's eye is never unsure where she's facing or what position her body is taking, because the potent black parts of her outfit stand out against her brighter skin tone and always denote where her limbs are in relation to her body and her head. Secondly, the scarf follows the direction of gravity, and thus serves as a kind of compass for the player to be able to tell up from down. No matter what surface Cat's standing on, the scarf will always be pointing down. Her distinctive red eyes make for a sharp little bit of punctuation in the design and draw your attention to her face, which is comfortably framed by the scarf and headband combo. Also, I just kind of love Cat's face. I mean, look at it. I do feel the need to address the obvious, sexuality of Cat's design. You know, it's clear that sex appeal was a facet of the design process, and I can totally understand if that's bothersome for some players. I would like to bring up an interesting point made in Lady Inea's video about My Hero Academia and the way that that show treats its female characters, which I think is relevant here.
This isn't to say you can't have sexy female characters who are just sexy. No other reason than that's how they are. Hell yeah, that's awesome. But it's possible to have a sexy female character in a way that doesn't objectify and belittle her, and most media fails to do sexy female characters in that way.
In sum, there isn't anything wrong necessarily with a design being sexy, because there's a difference between a sexy design and one which is exploitative. In my opinion, Cat's design isn't exploitative or demeaning to her as a woman. It's definitely a little on the skimpy side, but it's cool and clean, it doesn't have an excessive boob window or whatever. It feels regal and fashionable, and it doesn't feel degrading or disrespectful to the character herself. But that much is down to personal perspective. That said, I can't really say the same for all of Cat's designs. Some of these alternate outfits do feel a little bit fetishistic, like the maid outfit or the, spy outfit. But I do think it's hard to give Cat the write-off as a sexist cliche when she's just so damn likeable. She's about as likable a protagonist as you could hope for, and she does a lot of heavy lifting in terms of the plot, but again, we'll come back to that. I swear, I swear this is the last time I'm going to put it off. The next time I mention the plot, I'm actually going to talk about it. Nevertheless, Cat is pretty great. She really strikes a fun middle ground between East Asian and Euro-American appeal. Or, as Yamaguchi would have it, it's like a Japanese anime, but also like an American comic book hero. Exotic and like a ninja. And yet, it's a character of unknown nationality. Cat reading as a character of unknown nationality is something that Toriyama seems to care a lot about. The idea of statelessness is something which cropped up several times while researching for this video. The story of this work, he explains, is based on the statelessness of the 1970s anime I watched as a child. He alludes to Majoko Megu-chan from 1974 specifically, a popular magical girl anime from that era, and one with a protagonist who Cat mirrors somewhat. I mean, what is the Gravity Queen if not a magical girl? But when it comes to creating that 1970s anime vibe, there's really no better item in this game's toolkit than its absolutely phenomenal score. At the beginning of the first game's development, Toyama had a meeting with his sound staff and very definitively said that the game requires a catchy piece that uses an orchestra like those used in anime of the 1970s. The staff replied decisively, "The only person who can create that kind of music right now is Koei Tanaka." The name Koei Tanaka might sound familiar to you, or it might not. The guy is most well known for having composed a lot of music for the One Piece franchise in its various shapes and forms. Movies, anime, games, the works. I can't say I know much about One Piece, but I do know that the music goes incredibly hard. And yeah, he did compose the absolute banger that is the original Season 1 OP, We Are. Tanaka's work on Gravity Rush is absolute fire. To be honest, this entire video could be nothing more than just a thinly veiled attempt on my part to justify gushing about the music, because I love it that much. And Lord knows, Toyama knew it too, right from the offset. Kind of like with Cowboy Bebop, the music goes so hard that it started to inform the creative decisions Toyama and the rest of the dev team were making in the back end. Looking back on the development period, Toyama said that he was constantly inspired by the music Tanaka would send him, saying, "This is how it came out, so I have to work hard to make the most of it." In the Gravity Days series, the game and music influenced each other as the work was shaped. Now, something you might immediately be taken aback by when booting up Gravity Rush 1 for the first time is, wow, is that a live orchestra? Did they get a live orchestra for this PS Vita launch title? And the answer is, yeah. They went absolutely sicko mode on that front. Tanaka has been very vocal about getting to use a lavish amount of musical instruments while recording. Some of them were even ordered just for one phrase. The choice to use a live orchestra for these two games makes a massive amount of difference. It really creates this enormous sense of scale and breadth to the story and its world. It expands the game into something else, something cinematic. It makes the overworld themes simultaneously very re-listenable as background music, but also so distinctive, so melodic, like you could just pop them on your playlist and vibe out. This is something which I often do. I love that Tanaka brought his A-game for this, in spite of the scale of the project. He seems to have this philosophy towards his work that he won't turn down a job unless time literally permits him from doing it. He even arranged a song for a middle school brass band. I mean, think about that for a second. Like, imagine if your music teacher got fucking Hans Zimmer to arrange a piece for your high school barbershop or something. I don't know, it's wild. And for this job, Tanaka really pulled from a vast array of styles, genres, and instruments to craft the score. Rather than following a particular style found from pop culture sources, he intricately mixed all kinds of genres to reflect and express the skewed, gravity-shifting perspective of Cat's world. The music really leaves a strong impression on you from the very start. When the game begins and you follow a falling apple through the streets of Hexville, you're greeted by the Discovery of Gravitation theme. I love this naming convention because, you know, the theory of gravitation was discovered when a red apple fell from the sky. The theme opens on this delicate solo piano melody before absolutely blasting outward into the full-scale orchestra pulled forward by the accordion, objectively the best instrument. This grand orchestral suite really captures the wonder and awe of this immaculately designed city as we see it for the first time. The melody then shifts to something a little more off-kilter and mysterious, mirroring the more enigmatic side of the story to come. This melody is somewhat foreshadowing for the end title theme, Dausei Shinundukara, which shares its motif. And then, just like it began, it reels right back to that gentle piano as the screen pans to reveal Cat waking up in Old Noir for the very first time. That Old Noir theme is absolute peak intro area music. It perfectly introduces you to this world at a gentle pace. It gently eases you in with that soft string intro, and then that little fluttering call and repeat melody between the oboe and flute is so whimsical and magical. And those little bells and chimes in the background help to keep it light and airy. The music really helps to give every area you explore its own unique identity and atmosphere. When you travel from Old Noir for Play-June, the soft and whimsical stylings of Old Noir are traded out for a more up-tempo jazz number. It's got that good ragtime rhythm to it, really harkening back to a bustling kinda 1920s city vibe. It's got that sharp, muted trumpet tone, or the Miles Davis tone as I like to call it. This kind of music feels like something you might hear in a speakeasy, thus capturing perhaps a seediness to the red light district, but also the main melody is piloted by the fiddle, which feels very Stéphane Grappelli and keeps the overall soundscape squarely within that French-European sphere. After Play-June, you've got Industria, the factory district. The music here is very severe, very dour. I definitely say Industria is my least favourite location in the game, but the music still feels fitting. The string section has this dark intensity to it, pulsing in with a strict and rigid regularity. That regularity is reflective of the mechanical nature of this setting, and it makes the entire zone feel a lot less like home than Old Noir does. The last major area of the game that you'll visit is Vendor Center, the bustling downtown district. Once again, this really captures that Kiki's Delivery Service, town with an ocean view kind of beat, but closer to the second half where it starts to crescendo. And once again, we've got that good accordion melody. It's the best instrument. With that dope sounding string section underneath it. I love how they go up an octave and that main melody is taken over completely by the string section. It gives that sense of expansion, of scale, which mirrors our own experience entering the largest and most expansive part of the city. And all of these town overworld themes have such a strong central melody to them that you'll find looping in your brain. Gravity Rush 2 does the music even better. That Gravity Rush 2 title theme fucks. I don't know how else to put it. Like, I ain't no music scholar, I'm going mostly off vibes here, but damn. It genuinely feels so epic. It's a title theme worthy of any great big budget movie. The way it crescendos at the end there, it's just peak. The biggest difference between the Gravity Rush 1 soundtrack and the Gravity Rush 2 soundtrack is the latter's more Latin sensibilities compared to the European vibe of the former. Lake Olmosna is the first major metropolitan hub that you're going to encounter in the game, and its up-tempo beats have a combination of Caribbean-inspired and Latin-inspired rhythms that feel immediately so far removed from what you're used to. The sun is always blazing in Lake Olmosna, like you're sitting right on the equator, and the music feels as warm as the setting itself. When the majority of the music in the first game was centered around that orchestra, Lake Olmosna is very much brass band driven. You can sense that Mexican inspiration in particular breathing through the predominant use of trumpets in this track. Le Havina's music is completely different. Those Latin beats are nowhere to be found here, trading in the brass band for... how do I describe this? Okay, so you know the song Hopelessly Devoted from Greece? It's like that. It's very 1950s inspired pop orchestra with a sax solo to boot. It feels much more Euro-American, which is surely intentional. The setting itself is colonial, populated mostly by rich white settlers, so it makes sense that the music would also carry some colonial subtext. They've plastered over the indigenous music with their own. It's like they've gentrified the soundscape itself. It's pretty clever, but it is also a bop. Then, all the way at the bottom, the Ley Algona theme readopts that Latin inspiration, only with a somber overtone. The piece revolves mostly around the nylon-strung acoustic guitar, a staple of music culture in places like Brazil, Mexico, Cuba, and so on. What I love about this track, though, is that it actually reintroduces a motif from the title theme as its main melody. Giving us that little sting of something familiar subconsciously endears us to this place. It makes us feel oddly at home here, in spite of the state of things and in spite of the overwhelming sense of sadness. But there's one piece in the soundtrack that I really want to spotlight. When asked to name his favourite piece of music in the entire 4-disc Gravity Rush 2 OST, Keiichiro Toyama name-dropped the song Akuan Tua, known also as A Red Apple Fell from the Sky. What you'll likely notice right off the bat is that this song uses an old motif from the first game, specifically the very first piece of music that you hear as soon as you hit play, the discovery of gravitation. See, there it is again, right? The discovery of gravitation occurred when a red apple fell from the sky? God, I love this game. In either case, the song basically serves as a kind of reprise of that melody, bridging the gap between the first and second games. I love this song with my whole heart and chest. It's absolutely dope. It feels like an old jazz standard, a sweet little French swing number, something Edith Piaf might sing on a good day. We first hear it when Kat is accidentally strong-armed into singing on stage, and it feels like she's bringing that Hexvillian French-adjacent vibe into this strange new place that she doesn't recognize. It establishes the melody not just as any old tune, but as Kat's melody specifically. It recurs later in the game to oddly poignant effect, but I don't want to get into spoiler territory just yet. And also, that clarinet solo? Absolute fire. They had no right going so hard on this number, and the fictional-ass language that they made up for this game still works in the context of a song. It doesn't sound like goofy Simglish or whatever, and at the end of the day, the music in Gravity Rush does so much to maintain a potent atmosphere throughout the story. To be honest, it actually does a lot of heavy lifting where that's concerned. I think both Gravity Rush 1 and 2 get away with a lot of narrative faux pas by virtue of how hypnotic the visuals and music are, and how much they placate you to the game's shortcomings in the script department. Okay, it's time. I can't put it off any longer. We have to talk about the story of Gravity Rush. When I started this video, I mentioned how the game epitomizes the idea that something can be more than the sum of its parts, and really, the story is where you feel the backhanded side of that the most. It's almost difficult to summarize the story. It's really scattershot, incredibly episodic, takes you all over the place, and often lacks cohesion. I don't want to harp on it too hard. If I genuinely felt the story was detrimental to the enjoyment and quality of the game, I wouldn't be here writing an 18,000 to 19,000 word script about a game that no one played for a video no one is going to watch. Anyway, I'm gonna run you all through the story now, and I'm gonna do it as quickly and succinctly as possible because it's really not worth a full beat-for-beat explanation, but I do want to at least linger on the introductory scene because I think it's noteworthy. So, as we've established, Gravity Rush begins with Kat waking up in the floating city of Hexville with no memory. The first thing that happens is she's woken by a mysterious black cat, the most obviously magical cat you've ever seen in your entire life. Perturbed by her lack of memory, Kat gradually rises from the depths of the Undercity when a man approaches her, begging her to save his son. This is the first major piece of characterization for Kat. She has no idea who or where she is, but she's ready to toss that all aside for the service of another person, and a total stranger at that. Kat follows the man through the pipes of the Undercity, and the player is beginning to experience some of the overarching themes about class and poverty. The denizens treat her, an outsider, with suspicion and derision, but are themselves living in abject squalor. I think it's important, on a thematic level, that we begin the game at the physical bottom of the city and experience its most neglected areas before anything else. It makes the stakes clear right from the start. The man leads her to where his house is, and it's being swallowed by a gravity storm, our first time seeing one, and his son is trapped inside. He asks Kat to help. Obviously, she has no idea how or what he expects her to do. He responds by saying that she's quote-unquote like that crow girl, and that she can use her cat to get up there and save him. So the existence of gravity shifters is established in this world, and there's at least one other who already resides here. Nevertheless, the magical cat takes the reins, catapults you into the air, tutorializes you through some basic gravity shifting, and you're ready to save this kid. We also see a creature, what this game calls Nevi, reach through the gravity storm. These are going to serve as the main punching bags of the game. Nevertheless, with partial utility of your newfound gravity shifting under your belt, you save the child. But, much to the surprise of both Kat and the player, you're met with only more beratement and suspicion. The man and his child blame you for the destruction of their house, rather than thanking you for the rescue. The man makes an offhand comment about how these gravity shifters cannot be trusted. Okay, so there's a lot we've learned here. Firstly, the city of Hexville is plagued by both poverty and environmental disaster. Secondly, the existence of gravity shifters is pre-established, but whichever shifters may be living here before us are not well liked, and have acted in ways to arouse suspicion even over us. But hey, we have a cat now. His name is Dusty. Kat makes a brief sighting of the other shifter, the aloof deuteragonist Raven, rescues a cop from some thugs, fights some more Nevi things. The cop's name is Sid. He'll recur a few times. He does mention that the existing powers that be don't care for gravity shifters because it makes them feel less powerful. It's a lot of stuff happening in a short span of time, but at least the game is starting to sprinkle in some odd comments here and there about the authority of Hexville. Before we round out the chapter, it's time for Kat to set up a hub for herself, somewhere to live, and the answer is basically just, homelessness. I kind of love that though. Kat is always positioned as part of the lower classes, someone on the fringes of society. Talking to the locals makes it abundantly clear that homelessness is on a rampant increase due to the ongoing environmental disasters, and that the government has absolutely nothing in place to help the people affected. In fact, it'd rather pump money into a militant police task force than into rehousing its own people. But whatever. We have a pipe now. This is where we live. And that, in a nutshell, is the setup for Gravity Rush. It only gets a lot more scattershot from this point forward, and I'm gonna do my best to keep it mostly spoiler-free, but we are gonna get into some spoilers as we go, especially for Gravity Rush 2. The fundamental plot of Gravity Rush can be broken down into three facets. On one hand, you've got Sid, the detective, who's hunting down a master thief called Alias, who may also have supernatural powers to control the Nevi. On the other hand, you've got the oppressive Mayor Denelica, who serves as the de facto antagonist of the first game. His political efforts are entirely in harnessing gravity energy to create weapons, bolster his military, and to use the Nevi as a scapegoat to justify his fascist regime. Then, on a third, unexpected hand, you've got the rather opaque mystery of where Kat comes from, told mostly through her interactions with an otherworldly figure called Gade. Gade will occasionally take her on small pocket adventures throughout other dimensions. If that all sounds like a lot, that's because it absolutely is. I don't feel the need to go into express detail on all of these plot points. Not just because it'd take up a whole lot of time in a video that's already shaping up to be the length of a feature film, but because it's largely unnecessary. I don't think any of these plot points in isolation are that bad, although they're delivered fairly unsubtly. The fundamental themes of the story are executed fine enough, and it provides a decent platform upon which to set the action and the gameplay. It's just that 3 concurrent plot lines are spread quite thin instead of given the necessary individual focus that might make for a stronger story. Plus, the way the script maps out these 3 storylines in relation to one another is flimsy at best, and in some cases extremely unclear until the sequel game. I think the biggest specific problem I have with the story of Gravity Rush is that Dusty has a tendency to come and go as he pleases. Now, anyone who's owned a cat will know that this isn't entirely inaccurate behaviour, even if that cat is an elder being with gravity powers. The real issue is that Dusty will just come and go at the writer's whim whenever they need to debuff Cat or put her in an unfavourable situation. It feels a lot less like naturalistic cat behaviour, and a whole lot more like the writers contriving ways to make the plot move in and out of states of tension. The most egregious example of this is the entire setup for the plot of Gravity Rush 2. Cat and Dusty are separated after Cat is sucked through a gravity storm between the events of the first and second games. She's spat out onto a mining fleet where she has to earn her keep without the assistance of her gravity powers, and Dusty is nowhere to be found. That is, until Dusty then spontaneously reappears when it's most convenient for him to do so, and the rest of the game can follow suit. This kind of thing happens annoyingly often, and if it's not Dusty just leaving, then it's Dusty eating something that makes him temporarily sick for as long as it's convenient for the plot. It lends the game a very unnatural pacing at times. Now, you might be wondering, what about this isn't ruinous to the experience of the game? There are 2 answers I have to that question. First and foremost, I want to reiterate that the story really isn't the appeal of Gravity Rush. It's a fun, atmospheric game driven by a unique mechanic and an absorbing fantasy world. Second, and I really can't stress this enough, the game gets away with a lot of writing faux pas solely on the strength of the protagonist herself, Cat. Cat is, quite frankly, just a terrific hero. She's an absolutely classic she-himbo. Pure of heart, dumb of ass. She'll regularly idiot brain herself into avoidable situations, but she'll always do right by the people around her in the end. The way that Cat sees the world is pretty simple. She's a true blue paragon. Nice, honest, and it's really difficult not to be swept away by that. She kinda reminds me a bit of Kiryu if he were less stoic on the outside. I imagine they'd get along famously. And you have to believe me when I say she'll win you over too. You kinda don't care how silly the story gets, you're just willing to follow this amazing, dumb, pure-hearted idiot to the ends of the planet, no matter what. The best thing about Cat, though, is that she doesn't intellectualize what it means to do the right thing. The concepts of right and wrong are never absolute to her. She's surprisingly open to the nuance of the various situations she finds herself in and will make judgment calls based on what her gut tells her to do. But to understand why that matters, why that's a valuable quality for a hero to have, we need to talk about modern superhero media in general and how Gravity Rush specifically fits into all of this. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is the forefront of modern superhero media, and I think we can all agree. Everything I'm about to say is in reference to the MCU in particular because it's the most dominant force of the genre in pop culture today, so don't go giving me counterexamples in the comments from some comic book I haven't read. It's not relevant. Hey, I see you typing, stop it. Alright, good. Marvel films are pretty milquetoast. Their depictions of heroism couldn't be more different to Gravity Rush. The people themselves rarely matter. What's worse is that the heroes of the MCU tend to find themselves acting as the long arm of the establishment. On the odd occasion, they find themselves in conflict with the establishment. The story curtails any kind of radical thinking by playing a very trite, very shallow game of both sides. The obvious example here is The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, a show which starts pretty strong, introducing a very valid conflict after the events of Avengers Endgame, in which half the world's population has suddenly returned into existence. We discover that the US government has failed to reintroduce these people into society. As such, people are facing mass displacement. Life insurance policies avoided, homes are lost, people are without work. It's devastating. There also seems to be little concern at the top of the food chain for how to resolve these problems. It's no surprise, then, that a terrorist cell quickly manifests out of the civil unrest. The problem with Falcon and the Winter Soldier is that it treats the actions of this terrorist cell as equal in weight to the inaction of the government on a nationwide scale. Oh no, can't have this van full of billionaires and politicians die. In the end, Sam Wilson ends up basically defending the establishment and letting them off with a good stern talking to. Frankly, it's pathetic. Meanwhile, when Kat finds out that the government of Yerga Paralau is exploiting its people, she ignites a revolution and physically dismantles the military-industrial complex. Okay, so I will say that Gravity Rush 2 has a generally much more consistent and satisfying story than Gravity Rush 1. I think 2 is basically an improvement upon 1 in all areas. We're dumped in media res into an unfamiliar situation in an unfamiliar environment. We appear to be playing as some kind of miner, pulleyed into the depths of a gravity storm to extract the precious gems deposited in the rock below. To our surprise, the miner we're playing as is actually Kat herself, obfuscated by heavy armoured gear. Between the events of the first and second game, Kat, Sid and Raven were sucked through a gravity storm which spat Sid and Kat out into a mining settlement called Bunga, but separated them from Dusty and Raven. In stride with Gravity Rush 1, the socialist themes of the game are placed front and centre. The Bunga settlement is very much working class and feels as though it's constantly teetering on the edge of abject poverty. They have work they do, but they remain in constant pursuit of that work to keep their heads above the water, and their supplies are heavily rationed, something we find out the hard way when we're deprived of our own food rations for damaging our mining equipment. The mining trade is portrayed as incredibly competitive, pitting already destitute working-class communities against each other in a race to secure their own financial well-being. Bunga in particular might be swift and fairly effective, but it's also saddled with crippling debt. I actually don't mind that our gravity powers aren't given to us from the offset of the game, at least from a narrative perspective. Our gravity powers always gave us the ability to transcend the ladder of class, so saddling us with a working class mining fleet with no powers at the start of the game endears us immediately to the plight of Yerga Paralau's least fortunate. But you know, Kat gets her powers back because Dusty miraculously reappears. We're then introduced to our first minor antagonist, Vogo, the swindling oligarch who peddles the ore that Bunga mines, and who consistently f***s them over at any opportunity. Kat's first real goal in the opening chapters of the game is to basically show this guy what for, and make him agree to more livable shipping terms with the Bunga fleet, and help them to clear their debt. Something which she can do using her gravity powers both to bring in more ore and to apply a little brute force against Vogo where necessary. This is the first time we see Kat starting to use her powers to transcend class-based terms, which have thus far kept Bunga under the foot of oppressors. With that portion of the game concluded, it's time to dock at the main overworld for Gravity Rush 2, Yerga Paralau. I'm not going to go over the plot of this game in exhaustive detail, but I am going to focus on some core points which contribute to the thematic overtones of the game. What we discover upon entry to Yerga Paralau is that Vogo's shipment of ore has come up short, likely the result of thievery at the hands of a quote-unquote dangerous gang called the Angry Centipede. Kat does some poking around until she finds this gang, tails them back to their hideout, but what she discovers is the aforementioned Le Elgona settlement, rife with poverty and home to the absolute poorest of Yerga Paralau. If we thought we knew poverty in Bunga, it's nothing like what we see here. The Angry Centipede stole the ore with the intention of using it to support the many, many hungry mouths of the destitute houseboat fleet. This presents Kat with the first major moral question, and one which is deceptively simple, but which other stories in the genre will typically avoid. Is it always wrong to commit a crime? In this case, is it wrong that the angry centipede committed theft? And the answer is, no. What is criminal and what is immoral are not always the same thing, something which Kat immediately recognizes. When it turns out that the military were also in pursuit of the angry centipede, Kat is quick to use her power to defend the houseboat fleet from the unjust and cruel violence of the oppressive militarist government. She sadly has to secure the ore nonetheless, but chooses to sacrifice her own share to the houseboat fleet in an attempt to enact some small change. But small gestures like this, while decent, aren't enough to incite actual, meaningful change. What's more, the other people of Yerga Paralau, including the leader of the Bunga settlement herself, are tragically apathetic to their circumstances, something which Kat finds abhorrent. It's not long before we get to start exploring the rich Lehavina settlement of the city, and that immediate disparity in wealth is noticeable. I think that the game could have done with a bit more subtlety in terms of how it writes rich people. Like, yeah, eat the rich and all that, go off queen, but I think it does the story a disservice to have them all be cartoonishly evil moustache twirlers with zero nuance at all. At this point, the game starts asking questions of Kat, and of you, the player, about the distribution of wealth, the unnecessary excess and hoarding of that wealth by the upper classes. We're even given the opportunity to make some decisions about how we distribute resources on a small scale. Do we take this shipment of fuel to Lehavina so they can burn it on a party, or do we break the rules, give it to the people who actually need it, and face the consequences ourselves? We also learn that the militarist government has plans to displace the entire houseboat fleet so that they can build tourist attractions there, something which is hauntingly pertinent to real-life events. Again, Kat is able to leverage her physical prowess to protect the most needy. Now, without going into too much detail, this is the point in the game where Kat has now made herself an enemy to the powers that be, the military government known as the Garrison. They oversee the operations of Yerga Paralau from a gunship way above the skyline. The Garrison mount an offensive on the Bunga fleet, which they expect to outgun, but we stop them with some good old-fashioned superheroing. So, I'm not going to bury the lead here. The next major plot beat after this point is that the player launches a full-blown counter-offensive against the Garrison gunboat and quite literally overthrows the military. And I love this. Again, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here because I think you should just play it and experience it, but this fucks. This absolutely fucks. I have to hand it to them for completely curtailing the white bread bullshit centrism of your average superhero affair and going full revolutionary. I appreciate that the story has the fucking cojones to affirm the simple salient reality that class war can't be won by placating the oppressors. It does that Monkey Man thing where it doesn't limp dick the third act by going, oh no, violence isn't the answer. No, violence absolutely is the answer, and sometimes it is necessary. And it feels genuinely good that Kat's powers are used in that way to transcend the wide gap in raw power between the military government and the oppressed underclasses. Plus, this whole action sequence is an absolutely busted set piece. It makes for such a dope mid-game upping of the ante. It really works on every level. Now, up to this point, I've been kind of ambivalent towards the story of Gravity Rush. It really is a mixed bag, emphasis on mixed, and it's by far the worst part of a game that I otherwise love. At the beginning of this video, and a few times throughout, I've reiterated this idea that Gravity Rush is more than the sum of its parts, that somehow the overall experience of the game is stronger than it might look on paper. There are two final examples that I'd like to give to underscore what I mean by this. Oh, and spoilers ahead, so skip to this timecode if you want to avoid those. In the 8th chapter of Gravity Rush 2, like a radio, Kat and co have entered the beginning phases of their rebellion. Kat's job is to make her way to the gunboat and use her gravity powers to take reconnaissance photos at angles and altitudes that only she can easily achieve. When she makes her way onto the ship, she's suddenly mistaken for a singer by some band performing a gig on the Fort Bismarlia. So as not to arouse too much suspicion, she powers through, performing the aforementioned song, Akuantua, or A Red Apple Fell from the Sky. In spite of her best efforts though, she's quickly discovered and the action may continue. So this scene is stupid. It's stupid, it's cliche, it's a completely unnecessary and unnatural break from the flow of the action, and I love it. I mean, Kat is so dumbfoundedly lovable that it's hard not to enjoy basically anything she does, and I'm sure a smarter character would have found a better way out of this situation than she did, but also, you know, this song is great. It's a really good song. In spite of how much this scene shows off the most glaring issues with how the story is written, you can't help but just vibe with it. Fast forward to the end of the game. Kat is on her last legs, fighting some monstrosity that's out of control. She's really struggling to keep it together, overpowered at every turn and seemingly way out of her depth. Then, when all hope seems to be dashed, this happens. The townsfolk of Hexville start singing her song back to her. When you're seeing this for the first time, you might be wondering, why do they know this song? We don't hear this song at any point before the Bismarlia infiltration, which is all the way over in Yurgaparalau. How do these people know this song? Was it recorded on the radio? And even if it was, how would they know it was her? And you know what? Logic be damned, I love this bit with my whole heart and chest. This is what it all comes down to, right? Like, Kat is the hero of the lower classes, the defender of the people, the one who, in spite of their cold shoulder, in spite of their suspicion, in spite of how quickly and easily the working classes can be turned on one another, always stood up for them, without expectation of reward. When they sing this song back to her, it's them showing Kat that they see her, that they recognize her, they embrace her, and they believe in her. And in that moment, you can't help but be a little swept up in that. This game is far from perfect. It's a beautiful, fun, bizarre, exciting mess, and I genuinely love every second of it. Hell, I wouldn't have dedicated several months of my life to writing and editing a massive video about it if I didn't believe it was worth talking about. I don't know that there's any larger point to be made with this video. If you wanted to take any moral away from all of this, then I guess just don't be afraid to give those 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10 games a chance, you know? Art and creativity is so much more complicated than good or bad. If I genuinely based my gaming habits off what I see on fucking zero punctuation, then I never would have discovered some of my favorite games, from Gravity Rush to Cloudpunk. That's another one, by the way. Go play Cloudpunk. That game absolutely slaps. As Victor would have it, there is no prize to perfection, only an end to pursuit. There is genuine merit and value to be found in some of these weird, fringe titles that just slipped under your radar. And I guess that's all I have to say about Gravity Rush. Sorry it took me almost 20,000 words to do it. This has been Curmudgeon Media. My name's Tom, and I'll see you in the next one. Wow, that was a lot. Sorry it took me so long to get this video out. It's difficult to work on YouTube while also working full time. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. You guys are who I do this for. You might have noticed that I don't really do shorter videos anymore, so I'd like to confirm that yes, the 10 to 20 minute long jobbies are a thing of the past. I love making videos, but I much prefer to really take my time and create something special, something that I can enjoy and be proud of, even if that means it's stupidly long. Besides, long-form content is much more fun. Peace.